A single math error made in 1922 is now quietly breaking the American Southwest. 40 million people depend on the Colorado River. It irrigates over 5 million acres of farmland and supports more than $60 billion in annual agricultural output. But the river cannot deliver what the law still promises. And here is the problem. The hidden financial damage beneath that mismatch is far worse than the drought headlines suggest. The core mistake was simple. In 1922, negotiators gathered at Bishop's Lodge near Santa Fe with Herbert Hoover chairing the talks. They split the river at Leaf Area in northern Arizona and gave the upper basin states of Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming 7.5 million acre-feet a year. Then they gave Arizona, California, Nevada in the lower basin another 7.5 million acre-feet, 15 million acre-feet total. That deal only worked if the river reliably produced at least 16.4 million acre-feet. And that assumption turned out to be wrong from the start. The number came from weak science dressed up as certainty. Arthur Powell Davis and Albert Fall of the U.S. Reclamation Service had no reliable stream gauges at Leaf Area, so they estimated flow using data from Laguna Diversion Dam near Yuma, Arizona, more than 600 miles downstream. Brahmat time, they subtracted the Gila River and assumed desert evaporation losses were perfectly offset by tributary inflows they had never actually measured. At the U.S. Geological Survey EC, LaRue ran a separate analysis using Great Salt Lake levels calibrated against river records back to 1895. His answer was about 15.2 million acre-feet, which meant the official figure overshot reality by 1.2 million acre-feet every year. LaRue warned Hoover directly. Hoover thanked him politely and buried the result, because the bigger number made politics easier. Later science confirmed LaRue had been closer to the truth. Tree ring paleoclimatology shows that the 1905 to 1922 period used as the baseline was one of the wettest stretches in 1,200 years. Over the long run, the river averages of 13.5 million acre-feet. Since 2000, that has fallen further to roughly 12.4 million acre-feet per year. Once the 1944 treaty with Mexico pushed the total promise to 16.5 million acre-feet, the system was over-allocated by 20 to 30%. The compact did not divide a real surplus. It divided water that did not actually exist. For a long time, giant reservoirs hid the mistake. Hoover Dam created Lake Mead and Glen Canyon Dam created Lake Powell, and together they could store more than 4 times the river's average annual flow. As long as those lakes stayed reasonably full, the bad accounting was easy to ignore. Agriculture expanded into the desert, cities kept sprawling, and everyone behaved as if storage had solved the mismatch permanently. Then the 21st century stripped the cover away. The basin entered what researchers now identify as the most severe megadrought in at least 1,200 years. The river began carrying about 20% less water than its 20th century average. And each degree Celsius of regional warming started cutting 9.3% from stream flow before the water even reached the... That is why the reservoir collapse matters so much. Between 2000 and 2025, Lake Mead and Lake Powell fell from roughly 90% capacity to about 30%. Inflows into Lake Powell dropped at times to just 41 to 49% of the 30-year average. The system moved toward dead pool, the point where water can no longer pass through the dams at all. What had looked like a storage problem turned back into what it always was, a structural deficit written into law. Once the buffer disappeared, the river started exposing every balance sheet that depended on it. A federal shortages declaration does not end farming overnight. It triggers substitutions. The first one is groundwater. When surface deliveries shrink, farms drill deeper wells and pump aquifers to keep crops alive. NASA dataset shows the Colorado River Basin lost 27.8 million acre-feet of groundwater between 2002 and 20, nearly the same as draining Lake Mead's full storage from underground. Across the Great Basin watershed, including most of Nevada and large sections of California and Utah, another 16.5 cubic miles disappeared over a similar period. Psalms times the total volume left in Lake Mead at the end of 2023. In Arizona, the pace accelerated sharply, with average groundwater loss doubling to 12 millimeters per year between 2015 and 2024, while the central Arizona groundwater deficit jumped from 26,000 acre-feet in 2020 to 92,000 acre-feet by 2024. That pumping does not just buy time, it destroys capacity. Heavy overdraft has caused land subsidence of up to 6 meters in parts of Arizona and up to 12.5 feet in the most extreme zones. Cracks, canals, drains, and delivery systems needed for future surface water use. Once the geology compresses, the aquifer permanently loses storage space even if wetter years return. Then large operators have sped the damage up. Saudi-owned Almarai through Fondamonte and the Riverview Dairy Farm pumped so aggressively in Arizona's Wilcox Basin that residential wells went dry forcing Arizona's Attorney General to intervene and create an active management area projected to save 100,000 acre-feet by 2040. So even the backup system is being consumed as if it were disposable. When groundwater reaches its limit, the next substitution is fallowing. Land stops getting planted. California's Imperial Valley idled about 55,000 acres in 2024 under a deferred irrigation program. The Ute Mountain Farm in southwestern Colorado received only 10% of its historical allocation and abandoned 6,000 acres. Wyoming's Green River Basin lost more than 163,000 acres when drought shut deliveries off completely. The immediate damage is obvious, but the longer one is labor. Farm workers who are laid off in small towns do not usually sit still waiting for water to come back. They move permanently to Phoenix, Las Vegas, Southern California. Disappointed in farms that finally get water again discover that the labor force they depended on is gone. The financial shock spreads from there. When margins get compressed, producers stop buying equipment first. New tractor sales above 100 horsepower fell 22% year over year in 2025. Four-wheel drive tractor sales dropped 41%, and self-propelled combined sales fell 35%. Machinery prices had already climbed more than 21% between 2020 and 2023. So farmers responded by running old equipment under what one analyst called a run-to-fail strategy. Dealerships shrink, mechanics lose work, and local supply chains thin out. Even daily work rhythms change. Farm laborers in Pinal County now start baling hay at 2 in the morning because cooler nighttime temperatures help preserve moisture and reduce heat risk. Then the processing layer starts to break. Water shortages pushed 25,000 acres of sugar beet production out of the Imperial Valley rotation, and the Spreckles sugar plant lost the scale it needed to survive, closing permanently and taking more than 700 local jobs with it. Vegetable crop values in the Imperial Valley fell 15.84% year over year in 2024, a loss of $193 million, while fruit and nut production fell 12.1%. Once a plant closes, the effect loops back on the farm. Growers stop planting the crop because there is no buyer left nearby. At that point, the damage is no longer just lower output. It is the disappearance of the business ecosystem that made the crop viable in the first place. Farm debt shows what that looks like on paper. Total U.S. farm debt reached about $594 billion by 2025 after rising 9.1% in 2024, with another 3.8% projected for 2025. The meaning of that borrowing has also changed. By 2026, 31% of farmers in surveys said their bigger loan requests were being driven mainly by unpaid operating debt from prior years, up from just 5% in 2023. Operating loan volumes rose more than 30% for 3 straight quarters, while repayment weakened across Federal Reserve districts. The Farm Financial Stress Index, tied to those dynamics, hit 6.5 in 2026, compared with a baseline of 1.1 only 3 years earlier. Farms are not just financing the next season. More and more of them are refinancing the dam from the last one. Federal money is the only reason that damage has not become a full wave of defaults already. From 2017 through 2023, Colorado River farmers received $5.6 billion in drought-related crop insurance payments, with more than $2 billion going to hay and alfalfa producers alone. The Supplemental Disaster Relief Program added over $16.09 billion. USDA doubled the payment factor from 35% to 70% to keep borrowers alive. Another $2 billion came through the Emergency Livestock Relief Program and $9.3 billion through the Emergency Commodity Assistance Program. Net farm income only rebounded temporarily because government payments rose 203%, not because the underlying water or commodity picture had recovered. This is financial life support, not repair. Even so, asset values are already repricing lower. In California's San Joaquin Valley, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act forced the market to acknowledge that groundwater-dependent land was worth less than people had claimed. Vineyards and orchards without secure surface supplies lost 25 to 50% of their value in just 8 months. Almond orchards without surface water lost more than half their value. Pistachio orchards in Tulare County sold at only 25% of prior year prices. In Madera County alone, more than 500 agricultural properties fell below their original purchase prices. Cereal out on the Colorado High Plains, groundwater access adds a 119% premium over dryland parcels, which means when water disappears, the collateral behind rural lending disappears with it. Nominus that puts community banks right in the line of fire. Farm banks and specialized agricultural lenders hold 69.8% of all agricultural loans in the United States, $125.7 billion. Nearly 23% of those banks carry farm loan concentrations above 300% of total Tier 1 capital and credit reserves. Research also shows that every 10-foot drop in Saturn aquifer thickness pushes agricultural production loan delinquency rates up by 0.1. Under extreme drought stress tests, projected default losses can jump by a factor of 10. So the water crisis does not stay in canals and fields. It migrates into rural credit. Irrigation districts and municipal finance are feeling the same pressure. Westlands Water District, the largest agricultural water district in the country, reported a $25.1 million revenue decline in 2025, a 14% drop tied directly to 300,000 acre-feet less water delivered. Clyde, Texas, missed 2 straight debt payments after its lake dried up, and Standard & Poor's cut the city's bond rating immediately. Fitch moved Corpus Christi's water system outlook to negative over supply concerns. Nationally, there are about $300 billion of water and sewer revenue bonds outstanding, and the system still needs another $1.2 trillion of investment over the next 20 years just to keep aging infrastructure functional. In other words, the hydrologic shortfall is now showing up as municipal credit risk too, and the pricing structure underneath all of this may be the most irrational part. Agricultural districts pay a weighted average of $30.32 per acre-foot of water. Municipal utilities pay $512.01. 5 agricultural buyers in the lower basin, including Imperial Irrigation District and Coachella Valley Water District, control nearly 25% of lower basin water, $0 per acre-foot. California cities average $722 per acre-foot, and one Riverside County agency pays $2,870.21 for the same resource some agricultural districts receive for free. Then, when the federal government wants conservation, it pays Imperial Irrigation District $777 per acre-foot to save water the district got at no cost in the first place. That distortion has attracted a different class of player. Private equity groups such as Water Asset Management are buying farmland in Colorado's Grand Valley not mainly to farm it, but to sit on senior water rights. Arizona law also lets farmers convert irrigation rights into groundwater savings credits that can be sold to housing developers, and the first issuance retired farmland so it could supply water to 825 homes. Once those transfers happen, the local agricultural economy does not slowly adjust. It loses the water and the production base together. So this is not just conservation. It is a structural shift in who controls the region's future. Native American tribes sit in a different position, but not a secure one. Their senior claims total roughly 3.2 million acre-feet, yet decades of federal underinvestment mean much of that water remains paper water rather than wet water reaching tribal land through working infrastructure. Tribes are routinely pressured to sign forbearance agreements or lease water away at depressed rates. The lost economic value is enormous. Between an estimated $938 million and $1.8 billion in unrealized revenue, their unused rights have effectively become a free buffer supporting the overconsumption of everyone else. So even the system's legal priority holders are often subsidizing the imbalance by not being fully equipped to use what is theirs. Everything now points to the end of 2026. That is when the current interim operating guidelines expire. The Bureau of Reclamation has already published a draft environmental impact statement with 5 post-2026 alternatives. And the toughest one, the supply-driven alternative, begins mandatory cuts as soon as combined storage in Mead and Powell falls to 60%. The first reduction is 1.3 million acre-feet. As storage keeps falling, the shortage scales until it reaches 3 million acre-feet at 30% combined storage. And the system has already drifted uncomfortably close to those thresholds. The coming rules are not a theoretical adjustment. They are an attempt to force the legal system closer to physical reality. That is the water paradox. What looks like a drought story is really an accounting story that has been postponed for a century. The Southwest has been liquidating groundwater as natural capital while carrying rising financial liabilities on the other side of the ledger. Farm debt is higher, land values are lower, community banks are overexposed, irrigation districts are losing revenue. Water bonds carry more risk. Federal subsidies are the only remaining equity injection, and they cannot refill an aquifer that has physically collapsed. When the post-2026 cuts become permanent, it's the old fiction that law can command more water than the river provides will run headfirst into hydrology. Physics does not negotiate. What makes the crisis so deceptive is that each substitute can look like a temporary solution when viewed alone. Pump groundwater and the crop survives for another season. Fallow acreage in the district balances 1 year's deliveries. Borrow more and the operation stays current on paper. Size-raised subsidies and defaults do not explode this quarter. But none of those moves create new water. They only move the shortage into a different part of the system where it becomes harder for the public to see and more expensive to unwind later. That is why the Southwest water crisis has become a capital allocation crisis. Cheap agricultural water, free legacy allocations, emergency conservation payments, speculative water right purchases, and paper tribal rights all send conflicting price signals about what the resource is actually worth. So the basin keeps encouraging behavior that would look irrational in almost any other market. Users fight to preserve nominal access while the physical asset underneath keeps shrinking. The legal architecture says one thing, the balance sheet says another, and the river keeps enforcing the difference. The post-2026 fight matters because it is the moment when those two realities get forced closer together. If combined storage rules begin cutting deliveries at 60% and deepen shortages at 30%, then the hidden substitutions that carried the region this far become harder to repeat. Deeper wells will not fully replace lost surface water forever. Federal money will not stop permanent land subsidence. Rising debt cannot reverse the collapse in collateral values. In the end, the Southwest is not negotiating with lawyers, bond markets, or spreadsheets. Long pause menace. It is negotiating with a river that has already run out of patience. And the river has no reason to honor promises that were never physically possible.